Let's start with our lead story tonight. It's from Zimbabwe. It has cleared one of its 15-year-old financial arrears with the International Monetary Fund in the first step towards a new loan program. Now, Zimbabwe settled obligations of roughly $108 million or so by transferring part of its cash holdings at the IMF to the fund's Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. However, a new IMF loan program for Zimbabwe simply cannot be considered until the country clears more than $1 billion worth of arrears to the World Bank and another $600 million more, which is owed to the African Development Bank. Now, the next step towards an IMF loan would be consideration by the fund's executive board as a formal proposal to lift remaining remedial measures which have been imposed on Zimbabwe, mostly because of these arrears. Let's dig deeper into the details of exactly what's going on here. Farai Makutuye is live in Harare. Daniel Rangers is live in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Farai, let's start with you. Why did Zimbabwe opt to settle these dues by giving up part of its reserves at the IMF instead of funding it by steady payments from its own tax revenue?
Well, Rama, I think the government is trying to accelerate as much as possible its re-engagement, its ability to clear these arrears and therefore be able to access fresh loans. And so this is perhaps the quickest way to be able to do that. It also hopes that by making this commitment, it will score some points with the IMF as well as other lenders to show that it is serious about its debt clearance plan that it committed to last year. Also, paying off these arrears as it's done will also prevent the accumulation of any further arrears on that debt. You talk about tax revenue, but remember that more than 95% of current revenue to the government is going towards paying salaries and wages of civil servants. So as an option, that really wasn't available unless if it was to take that option, it will then draw out this process over a much longer period. So to do this very quickly and to score some points, it's chosen this route.
Indeed. Daniel, now that the dues to the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust have been cleared at least, what are the other remedial measures that need to be taken to sort out Zimbabwe's current relationship with the IMF?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that if the IMF is seeing some willingness on the part of Zimbabwe to come forward, pay off those arrears and begin to engage in the kinds of processes that they are familiar with, we could see a dramatic sea change in the relationship between Zimbabwe and the IMF. But I also think it's fair to say that the IMF, the fund, has reserved a good deal of skepticism about the possibility of progress moving forward, with keeping an open mind about the possibilities given the previous history. But that's to say, if Zimbabwe comes forward and does the things that they would like them to do, starts to talk about reforms that would be necessary to deal with issues like inflation and the currency issues that they face at the moment, and showed a willingness to want to work with the fund and other international institutions in a much more thoroughgoing way, I think the fund would see that as a very positive step forward and put in considerable resources to make sure that the relationship in future was much more productive and that they could begin to help Zimbabwe moving forward.
Indeed. Farai, though, in the larger context, what's been cleared is fairly small because Zimbabwe still needs bridge financing of another $820 million and another bilateral loan on top of that of about $900 million just to clear more outstanding dues. That's according to the plan that was presented by the finance minister back in Lima. Has that money been found yet?
Well, not yet, Rama. We know that the financial authorities here, the finance minister, the central bank governor, have been going all over the world virtually looking for a bailout of sorts. They've been to Europe, a number of capitals there. We know that they've recently, on their way back from Washington, have been to Russia, have been to Malaysia to look for this about $1.2 billion that they need to be able to rescue that debt resolution plan. That money is not yet available and they continue to look for it. there were options and there are options to perhaps mobilize some of this funding locally through some austerity measures, slashing the wage bill, retrenchments in the civil service. Those were proposed by the finance minister in his budget. Unfortunately, they've been overturned, so not an option going forward. So at this stage, Zimbabwe must depend on the goodwill and benevolence of some international lender or another country that may be willing to come to the table and offer it the money that it requires. A lot of people also asking why borrow money to pay off another debt, perhaps digging another hole to fill up another hole. But in the larger context of things, Rame has mentioned, what Zimbabwe is trying to do here is create that goodwill, clear these arrears, be able to access more money, which it will then be able to leverage to be able to get itself out of a very deep economic hole.
Indeed. Let's bring this full circle. Daniel, this deal does lower Zimbabwe's special drawing rights at the IMF by about 11% or so by my calculations. Could it therefore, given all the issues that Farai has just outlined, could Zimbabwe use more of its SDRs to clear out the debt overhang that it has with the IMF and the World Bank?
Well, I think that the discussions will probably, get underway once they begin to take these steps as they are doing now. As to the technical details of their SDRs, I think that remains to be seen. We'll have to see how the negotiations go. But I think that we have to stick with the big picture here. This is an economy that has struggled significantly in recent years. I think the fund is not just looking at this as a technical issue or even merely a political issue, but a way in which once they begin to build this relationship, they can find ways to better diversify the economy, bring in much more of the international institutions to begin to support ways in which they can diversify and encourage economic growth moving forward. So I think that's what the fund is going to begin to bring forward once they begin to clear away this sort of the legacy of this relationship and start to see how not only Zimbabwe can begin to diversify its economy, but it can also develop stronger and better trade links with some of its neighbors as well.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for your time, gentlemen.